The stars above Tharkale burned with ancient fire, casting eerie shadows across a landscape that had claimed more lives than any other known planet in the galaxy. Deep ravines cut through the surface like scars. Dense forests of towering alien vegetation obscured visibility beyond a few meters. And the air itself seemed to whisper warnings to those foolish enough to venture here. Elias Gray stood at the edge of a small clearing, his environmental suit's sensors quietly feeding information into his headset. The planet's atmosphere was technically breathable, but the high concentration of metallic particulates made prolonged exposure inadvisable. Behind him, the expedition team was setting up the base camp, 6 specialists from across the galaxy, all experts in their respective fields, all volunteers, all potential casualties. "Mr. Gray, the perimeter sensors are active." Dr. Ural's multi-toned voice came through the comm. The Cerebian scientist's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a sign of anxiety in his species. "Though I must again express my concern about their efficacy, given the unusual electromagnetic properties of this region." Elias nodded, more to himself than to the alien scientist. "We'll supplement with physical observation shifts. Old school, but reliable." His gaze drifted to the horizon where the primary sun was setting, bathing everything in a blood-red glow. The second, smaller sun would rise soon, creating the perpetual twilight that Tharkale was known for, a planet that never truly experienced darkness. Much like the shadows that had followed Elias throughout his career. He wasn't a soldier, had never claimed to be. The Galactic Federation had plenty of those, elite warriors with genetic enhancements and weaponry that could level small cities. Elias was something different, a survival engineer, someone who specialized in staying alive in environments that actively tried to kill you. He'd survived ice planets where the atmosphere froze solid during night cycles, gas giants with floating habitats perpetually on the edge of destruction, and rogue asteroids with gravity that changed direction without warning. But Tharkale was different. It wasn't just the environment that killed here. 17 Special Forces operatives, he muttered, remembering the briefing. 17 elite soldiers, armed with the best weapons the Federation could provide, with combat experience spanning decades, all dead within 48 hours of landing, and no clear indication of what had killed them. That's why Elias had volunteered. Not because he thought he could succeed where warriors had failed, but because something didn't add up. The Federation had classified Tharkale as a death-level planet not because of its environmental conditions, which were harsh but survivable, but because of something else. Something they couldn't quantify. The locals in nearby systems called it Jurak. The Federation dismissed it as superstition, a myth created by primitive cultures to explain natural disasters or predator attacks. But myths didn't tear through body armor designed to withstand plasma fire. Myths didn't disable communication systems and leave no trace of their passage except for the broken bodies of trained soldiers. "All primary systems operational," came another voice through the comm. Lirel, their tech specialist, a Vortian with reflexes fast enough to repair circuitry during power surges. "Though I'm picking up some unusual energy readings from the northern ridge." Elias turned to look where she indicated. The northern ridge rose like a spine from the planet's surface, jagged rocks interspersed with dense vegetation. "Geological?" he asked. "Negative. The pattern is too regular, almost like pulses." Something cold settled in Elias's stomach. The briefing had mentioned similar readings just before the previous team lost contact. "Pack up," he said, voice steady despite the adrenaline beginning to flow through his system. "We're moving away from the ridge before nightfall." But we just finished setting up," began one of the junior researchers. "Now," Elias cut him off. "Leave anything non-essential. priority on communication and survival gear. The urgency in his voice must have conveyed what his words couldn't. The team began disassembling their equipment with practiced efficiency. Elias turned back to the ridge, activating the enhanced vision mode on his visor. Nothing but rocks and twisted trees, yet something was there. He could feel it, a presence watching, calculating, waiting. The Federation had sent soldiers to fight. That had been their first mistake. You didn't fight Tharkael, you survived it, and Elias intended to make sure his team did just that. They moved through the deepening twilight, keeping to the shadows of the massive fungi-like growths that dotted the landscape. The second sun had risen, smaller and bluer than the primary, creating an unnatural mixing of light that confused depth perception and turned familiar shapes into alien silhouettes. 2 kilometers to the secondary landing zone, Dr. Uriel whispered, though there was no need for quiet. If the stories about Jurak were true, it didn't hunt by sound alone. Elias led the way, his steps careful but confident. His mind catalogued every detail of their surroundings, the slight variations in terrain, the movement patterns of the small indigenous life forms that scattered at their approach, the direction of the light breeze that carried the scent of decay and something else, something metallic and strange. "Does anyone else smell that?" Laurel asked, her sensory appendages twitching. Elias was about to respond when a sound cut through the ambient noise of the planet, a low, rumbling vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a mechanical hum. It existed somewhere in between, like the purring of an impossibly large machine. The team froze. "But what was—" began one of the researchers, but Elias raised a hand for silence. The vibration came again, stronger this time. Elias felt it in his chest, resonating with his heartbeat. The small hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, an ancient warning system triggering in response to a threat his conscious mind couldn't yet identify. "Run," he said simply. They ran. The forest seemed to close in around them, branches reaching like claws, roots rising to trip unwary feet. The mixed light created strobing effects that disoriented and confused. Elias heard the rapid breathing of his teammates, the occasional curse as someone stumbled, the increasing frequency of that strange vibration that seemed to be hunting them. "There!" Dr. Uriel called out, pointing ahead to a clearing where the secondary shuttle waited, its metal hull gleaming dully in the dual sunlight. Relief surged through Elias, but it was short-lived. As they burst from the tree line into the clearing, he saw that something was wrong. The shuttle's hatch was open, its interior dark. "Stop!" he called, but it was too late. The team rushed forward, desperate for the safety the vehicle promised. Elias watched in horror as the ground beneath the shuttle began to shift. What they had taken for solid earth was moving, rising, revealing itself to be not ground at all, but a massive armored form that had been lying in wait. Jurak. It unfolded like a nightmare given physical form, easily the size of the shuttle itself, with a body covered in overlapping plates that seemed both organic and metallic. Its limbs were wrong, too many joints moving in directions that defied conventional anatomy, and its head, if that's what it was, housed no eyes that Elias could see, just a series of sensory pits and what looked like antenna arrays. The vibration came again, but now Elias could see its source. The entire body of the creature pulsed with energy, creating a field that he could almost see distorting the air around it. "Scatter!" Elias shouted, knowing instinctively that staying grouped together would make them easy targets. The team broke apart, running in different directions. Jurak moved with shocking speed for something so large, flowing over the ground like liquid metal. It ignored the shuttle completely, focusing instead on the fleeing researchers. Dr. Ural wasn't fast enough. The creature overtook him in seconds, enveloping him in what looked like a cocoon of shifting plates. The scientist's scream cut off abruptly. Elias ran harder than he ever had, his survival instincts taking over. Part of his mind was analyzing, observing, noting the creature's movement patterns and apparent capabilities. But the primal part was simply screaming at him to get away. He broke back into the forest, ducking under low-hanging branches and vaulting over exposed roots. Behind him, he could hear more screams, quickly silenced. The vibration was all around him now, making it impossible to tell which direction the creature was coming from. A sudden silence fell. Elias slowed, then stopped, pressing his back against the trunk of one of the massive trees. His breathing was too loud in his ears, his heart pounding so hard he was sure it must be audible for kilometers. Minutes passed. Nothing. Carefully, Elias activated his comm unit. "This is Gray. Report in." His voice was barely a whisper. Static answered him. He tried again, cycling through different frequencies. Nothing but the persistent hiss of interference. Elias closed his eyes briefly. The creature, Jurak, was generating some kind of electromagnetic field that was blocking communications. He was cut off, alone on a planet classified as the deadliest in known space, being hunted by something that had just slaughtered his entire team in minutes. And he had no weapons, only his survival kit, his wits, and a determination to live that had gotten him through situations that should have killed him a dozen times over. "All right," he whispered to himself. "Assess the situation. Find shelter. Plan your next move. Basic survival, one step at a time." He pushed away from the tree and began moving deeper into the forest, away from the direction of the attack. His visor's enhanced vision mode helped him navigate the twilight gloom, but he kept it at minimal power to avoid detection. If Jurak could sense electromagnetic fields, and its own emission of such a field suggested it might, then any technology could potentially give away his position. After an hour of careful progress, Elias found what he was looking for, a small cave entrance, partially hidden by dense vegetation. It wasn't ideal, but it would provide better shelter than the exposed forest. He conducted a careful inspection before entering, checking for signs of habitation by local fauna or any unusual energy readings. Finding nothing immediately threatening, he slipped inside. The cave extended back about 20 meters before ending in a solid rock wall. It was dry, relatively warm, and most importantly, defensible. Elias set up a small perimeter of sensors, basic motion detectors that would alert him if anything larger than a small rodent approached the entrance. Then, he took stock of his resources. His survival pack contained basic rations for 3 days, a water purifier, a multi-tool, a compact medical kit, a thermal blanket, and his most valuable possession, MIL, the Mobile Integrated Logic Engine. It was an old AI system, outdated by Federation standards, but Elias had modified it extensively over the years. It couldn't match the processing power of newer models, but it had something more valuable: experience. MIL had been with Elias through every survival situation, learning and adapting alongside him. MILE, activate silent mode, Elias whispered. A soft glow emanated from the palm-sized device as it powered up. A text message appeared, rather than the usual vocal response. Active situation assessment. Elias quickly typed out what had happened. The AI processed the information, then responded. Threat entity. Zurak demonstrates advanced hunting capabilities and electromagnetic interference. Recommend minimal technology use. analyzing available data for weaknesses. Elias nodded. That aligned with his own thinking. He settled in, back against the cave wall, and closed his eyes to think. The Federation had classified Jurak as a myth, but myths didn't hunt with the precision he'd witnessed. The creature moved with purpose, intelligence. It had set a trap at the shuttle, suggesting it understood the concept of vehicles as escape means. It had targeted the team members specifically, ignoring the technology itself. This wasn't just an apex predator. This was something else entirely. Mile interrupted his thoughts with a new message. Analysis of previous expedition. Data shows pattern. All confrontations involved direct assault with weapons. Suggest alternative approach. Elias frowned. What alternative? We can't communicate with it. Unknown, insufficient data. Require observation of entity behavior patterns. Great. The AI was suggesting he needed to study the thing that had just wiped out his entire team. But deep down, Elias knew Mile was right. Fighting wasn't an option. Understanding might be the only way to survive. He set up a small sensor array at the cave entrance, calibrated to detect the specific electromagnetic frequency that Jurak seemed to emit. Then he settled in to wait, forcing himself to eat a portion of his rations despite his lack of appetite. As the hours passed, Elias's thoughts turned to the previous expedition. 17 Special Forces operators, all dead. But how had they died? The briefing had been vague on the details, mentioning only that the bodies were significantly damaged. Had they been consumed, torn apart, or something else? EILE flashed another message. Perimeter alert, entity approaching. Elias tensed, moving silently to the side of the cave entrance where shadows would conceal him. Through the narrow opening, he could see the forest beyond, still bathed in the eternal twilight of Tharkael's dual suns. The vibration came first, that strange, resonating hum that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his bones. Then movement, a shifting of shadows that seemed wrong somehow, too fluid for something so large. Jurak emerged into the small clearing before the cave. Up close, without the panic of immediate danger. Elias could observe it more carefully. Its body was indeed covered in plates, but they weren't armor in the conventional sense. They seemed to flow and shift, changing configuration as the creature moved. The material was unlike anything Elias had seen before, not quite metal, not quite organic, but some hybrid of the two. The creature paused, its sensory pits turning in different directions as if tasting the air. The antenna-like structures on what passed for its head vibrated slightly, emitting that distinctive hum. It was hunting him. Elias held absolutely still, barely breathing. His suit was designed to minimize heat signatures and mask biological markers, but he had no way of knowing what senses Jurak was using to track its prey. The creature moved closer to the cave entrance, its massive form blocking most of the light. Elias pressed himself flatter against the wall, heart pounding so loudly he was certain it must be audible. Jurak extended what might have been a limb. It was hard to tell, as the creature's body seemed capable of generating appendages at will toward the cave entrance. The tip of it changed, flattening and spreading out like a fan or a sensor array. Elias watched, fascinated despite his terror, as the appendage began to emit a soft, pulsing light. The cave walls reflected it, creating patterns that seemed almost like writing or code. Was this how the creature saw? Through some kind of light-based echolocation? The sensor array at the cave entrance, though minimal, contained electronic components. If Jurak could detect electromagnetic fields, the creature's entire form suddenly went rigid. The humming sound increased in pitch and intensity. The appendage whipped back, reshaping itself into something that looked disturbingly like a weapon, a barbed spear or harpoon. Elias didn't hesitate. He lunged forward, grabbing the sensor array and hurling it deeper into the cave. The device clattered loudly against the back wall. Jurak's attention snapped toward the sound. It surged forward, flowing into the cave with that uncanny liquid movement. As it passed Elias, he held his breath, pressing himself so hard against the wall that he could feel the rough stone digging into his back through his suit. The creature reached the back of the cave, its form stretching and reshaping to examine the sensor array. Elias saw his chance, perhaps his only chance. He slipped out of his hiding place and dashed for the cave entrance. He made it 3 steps before the vibration changed pitch again. Without looking back, he knew Jurak had detected him. He launched himself through the cave entrance just as something whistled past his head, one of those barbed appendages, missing him by centimeters. Elias hit the ground running, not daring to look back. The forest blurred around him as he pushed himself to maximum speed, jumping over obstacles, ducking under branches, changing direction randomly to throw off pursuit. The vibration followed, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but never absent. Jurak was tracking him, perhaps even toying with him. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Elias's lungs were burning, his legs threatening to give out. He couldn't maintain this pace. He needed a new strategy. Ahead, the forest thinned, revealing the edge of a ravine. Elias skidded to a halt just before the drop. Below, a river of some dark liquid, not water, too viscous, flowed sluggishly between jagged rocks. The vibration grew stronger. Jurak was closing in. Elias made a quick calculation. The ravine was too wide to jump, the sides too steep to climb down quickly. He was trapped. Or was he? He reached into his pack and pulled out his thermal blanket, a thin sheet of material designed to reflect body heat. Working quickly, he spread it on the ground near the edge of the ravine, weighing down the corners with small rocks. Then he took his water purifier, activated it to generate heat, and placed it in the center of the blanket. From a distance, or to sensors looking for a heat signature, it would look like a person lying down. Elias backed away. Finding a dense patch of vegetation to hide in, he curled into the smallest form possible, activated his suit's camouflage mode, and waited. The vibration reached a crescendo as Jurak burst from the tree line. It paused, its sensory pits scanning the area. Then it focused on the thermal blanket. Elias watched through the vegetation as the creature approached the decoy cautiously. It extended one of those malleable appendages. Testing, probing. The tip touched the water purifier. Elias held his breath. Jurak's entire form seemed to coil, then strike. Multiple appendages speared through the thermal blanket, shredding it and crushing the water purifier beneath. The creature paused, as if confused by the lack of resistance or response. That's when Elias noticed something odd, where the purifier had been damaged, leaking its internal chemicals onto Jurak's appendage. The creature's material seemed to be reacting. The flowing, metallic organic plates were moving more sluggishly, as if struggling to maintain their cohesion. A weakness, or just a temporary reaction? Before Elias could process this observation further, Jurak's form went rigid again. Its sensory pits turned, scanning, until they pointed directly at Elias's hiding place. It knew he was there. The game of cat and mouse continued for days. Elias learned to stay one step ahead of Jurak, using his knowledge of survival tactics and the environment to create distractions and false trails. He discovered that water, or rather, the specific mineral content of Tharkael's rivers, seemed to interfere with the creature's sensory abilities. He used this to his advantage, crossing water whenever possible to mask his trail. But it was always there, hunting, searching. The constant vibration became a backdrop to Elias's existence, a reminder that death was never more than a moment's carelessness away. He rationed his supplies carefully. Supplementing with edible plants he identified using MILE's database. He slept in short bursts, hidden in makeshift shelters, high in the twisted trees, or deep in narrow crevices where Jurak's bulk couldn't follow. And all the while, he observed, learned, understood. MILE helped him analyze the patterns of Jurak's behavior. The creature wasn't just hunting randomly. It patrolled specific areas with greater frequency, always returning to what Elias began to think of as nodes, locations where the electromagnetic activity was strongest. "It's protecting something," Elias murmured to himself on the 5th day, watching from a concealed position as Jurak circled one such node before moving on. "Or guarding it." MILE displayed a response. Behavior consistent with territorial defense rather than pure predation. Entity demonstrates complex patterns, suggesting higher cognitive functions. Elias frowned. If it's intelligent, why can't we communicate with it? Why does it attack on sight? Insufficient data. Possibility. Entity perceives all intruders as threats based on prior experience. That gave Elias pause. Prior experience. The Federation hadn't been the first to visit Tharkael. Archaeological evidence suggested an ancient civilization had once inhabited the planet. Long before recorded history. What if Jurak wasn't just a predator, but a creation of that civilization, a guardian or weapon, programmed to eliminate intruders? If that were true, then the approach of sending armed soldiers was exactly wrong. Every weapon fired at it would only reinforce its programming that intruders were hostile. Elias began to form a theory, and with it, a desperate plan. He spent the next day gathering materials from the environment and his dwindling supplies. Using MILE's engineering subroutines and his own expertise, he constructed a crude device, a signal generator that could mimic the specific electromagnetic frequency that Jurak itself emitted, but with modifications based on patterns he'd observed during non-aggressive movements. This is either going to communicate peaceful intentions, he told MILE, or it's going to attract it like a dinner bell. Probability of success, unknown. Alternative survival strategies, exhausted. Proceed with caution. Elias managed a grim smile. That's AI speak for good luck, isn't it? He chose his location carefully, one of the nodes where Jurak regularly patrolled, but with enough open space that he could see the creature coming and potentially escape if things went wrong. He set up the device, calibrated it to the specific frequency, and activated it. Then he waited. The response was almost immediate. The familiar vibration changed, took on a new pattern. It was coming closer, faster than Elias had ever experienced before. He fought the instinct to run, forcing himself to stand his ground as Jurak burst into the clearing. The creature was magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, its form shifting and flowing like quicksilver. Antenna arrays extended to their full length and vibrating intensely. It stopped just meters from Elias. Its sensory pits focused on him with an intensity he could feel physically. The vibration it emitted changed again, becoming a complex series of pulses and waves. Elias's device responded automatically, designed to adapt and respond to changes in the input frequency. A primitive form of communication, if that's what this was. For a long moment, nothing happened. Jurak remained motionless, as did Elias. The only sound was the soft hum of the device and the answering vibration from the creature. Then, slowly, Jurak began to change. Its form contracted, becoming more compact, less threatening. The barbed appendages withdrew, melding back into the main body. The sensory pits adjusted, some closing, others opening wider. Was it listening? Encouraged, Elias carefully reached for M-I-L-E. The sudden movement caused Jurak to tense, but it didn't attack. Elias connected M-I-L-E to the signal generator, using the AI's advanced analytical capabilities to refine the response patterns. The vibration from Jurak changed again, becoming more complex. EILA's screen displayed a partial analysis. Pattern recognition at 23%, detecting structured sequences, suggesting language or code, continuing analysis. Hope surged through Elias. It was working. They were communicating, however primitively. If he could just maintain the connection long enough for M-I-L-E to decipher the pattern. Without warning, the signal generator sparked and emitted a high-pitched whine. The improvised components, never designed for this level of sustained output, were failing. Jurak's reaction was immediate and violent. Its entire form seemed to explode outward, appendages sprouting in all directions, some aimed directly at Elias. The vibration became a deafening roar that made Elias's teeth ache and his vision blur. He lunged away just as one of the appendages smashed into the ground where he had been standing. The signal generator was crushed, along with M-I-L-E. Pain lanced through Elias as another appendage grazed his leg, tearing through his suit and the flesh beneath. He stumbled, but kept moving, heading for the tree line. Jurak pursued, its form stretching and flowing with impossible speed. Elias could feel it right behind him, could hear the whistling sound of those barbed appendages cutting through the air. He wasn't going to make it. In desperation, he turned to face the creature, backing away but no longer running. If he was going to die, he would die facing his hunter. "I'm not your enemy!" he shouted. Knowing the words themselves meant nothing to Jurak, but hoping that something in his posture, his lack of weapons, might register. Jurak paused, its form still extended aggressively, but not striking. The vibration continued, painful in its intensity. Elias slowly raised his hands, palms forward, the universal gesture of peace or surrender. Blood was soaking through his suit where his leg had been injured, but he ignored the pain. "I understand," he said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "You're protecting something. I'm not here to take it or destroy it. I just want to understand." The creature's sensory pits adjusted again, some closing, others opening wider. Was it curious? Slowly, telegraphing every movement. Elias reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object, a data crystal containing all the observations and analyses he'd made of Jurak and Tharkael. He placed it on the ground between them. "Knowledge," he said. "That's all I wanted. Not conquest, not destruction, just to know." Jurak's vibration changed again, becoming less aggressive, more rhythmic. One of its appendages extended toward the data crystal, hovering over it, but not touching. Elias took a chance. "You're not just a predator, are you? You're a guardian, a keeper, something left behind by those who came before." The vibration pattern shifted again. The appendage touched the data crystal, enveloping it. For a moment, Elias thought the crystal would be crushed, but instead, The material of Jurak's appendage seemed to flow around it, examining it. Then, to Elias's astonishment, the appendage extended toward him, offering the crystal back. With trembling fingers, Elias accepted it. "Thank you." The moment stretched, human and creature regarding each other across a gulf of understanding that seemed both vast and, suddenly, bridgeable. Then Jurak's form contracted again, becoming more compact. The vibration softened to a gentle hum. The creature turned, moving away from Elias with that fluid grace, back toward the center of the node. Elias watched it go, hardly daring to believe what had just happened. Had he actually established some kind of rapport with the most feared entity in the galaxy, or had it simply lost interest in him as prey? He would never know for certain, but he was alive, and that was more than anyone else who had encountered Jurak could claim. The wound on his leg needed attention, using the last of his medical supplies. Elias cleaned and bandaged it as best he could. It was deep but hadn't hit any major arteries. With proper treatment, it would heal. If he could get off this planet. His comm unit was still dead, the electromagnetic interference from Jurak's presence too strong for the signal to penetrate. But he had noticed that the interference seemed concentrated around the nodes. If he could get far enough away, perhaps he could establish contact with the orbital monitoring station that the Federation maintained. It took him 3 more days of careful travel, avoiding Jurak's territory as much as possible. His leg throbbed with every step, and his supplies were completely exhausted, forcing him to subsist on the local flora that MIL had identified as safe before its destruction. Finally, on the 8th day since the disaster at the landing site, Elias reached a high plateau far from any of Jurak's nodes. He activated his emergency beacon and waited. The response came within hours, a small rescue shuttle descending from orbit. The crew were shocked to find him alive, having written off the entire expedition as lost when they lost contact. Elias was even more shocked to learn that he was the only survivor not just of his team, but of any expedition to the surface of Tharkael. The 17 Special Forces operatives, the previous scientific teams, all had perished. All except him, the engineer, the survivor, the one who came to understand rather than to conquer. The debriefing back at Federation headquarters was extensive. Officials from various departments questioned him for days about every detail of his encounter with Jurak. They were particularly interested in his theory about the creature's origins and purpose. "You believe it's artificial?" asked Admiral Vorn, the head of the Federation's exploratory division. "A construct of the ancient civilization?" Elias considered his words carefully. "I believe it's both more and less than that. It's a guardian, yes, but not just a mindless sentinel. It has intelligence, perhaps even consciousness. It responds to perceived threats based on previous encounters. The Special Forces team went in armed and aggressive, so it responded in kind. Yet you survived by communicating with it." The Admiral's tone made clear his skepticism. "By showing it I wasn't a threat," Elias corrected. "The communication was rudimentary at best. But yes, there was an exchange of something, understanding. Perhaps." The questioning continued, becoming more technical as they delved into the specifics of Jurak's capabilities and vulnerabilities. Elias answered truthfully, but found himself emphasizing the creature's intelligence and the potential for non-violent interaction. He knew what they were thinking. The Federation would want to exploit Tharkael's resources, and Jurak represented an obstacle to that goal. They would be considering ways to eliminate or contain it. "What would you recommend as our next course of action, Mr. Gray?" asked a representative from the Science Division. her expression neutral, but her eyes sharp. Elias met her gaze steadily. "Leave it alone." A murmur went through the assembled officials. "That's not a practical solution," the admiral said dismissively. "Tharkael has strategic importance. Jurak has been guarding that planet for thousands of years." Elias interrupted, something he would never have done before his experience on Tharkael. "It was there before the Federation, before any of our civilizations. It will be there after we're gone, if we don't provoke it unnecessarily." "You sound like you admire this thing," said one of the military representatives, his tone accusatory. "I respect it," Elias corrected. "The same way I respect a solar storm or a gas giant's gravity well. It's a force of nature in its way. And like those other forces, we can either work with it or be destroyed by it." The debate continued for hours, but in the end, Elias's first-hand experience carried weight. The Federation designated Tharkael as a restricted zone, a sanctuary of sorts, no mining, no colonization, no military operations. Research would be conducted remotely, through orbital sensors and drones that wouldn't trigger Jurak's territorial responses. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. As for Elias, his encounter with Jurak changed him in ways he was still discovering. The injury to his leg healed, leaving a scar that ached when the weather changed. But the deeper changes were internal. He found himself more patient, more observant, more willing to look for understanding before taking action. The Federation offered him a promotion, recognition, even medals. He declined them all, requesting instead to be assigned as a consultant on first contact protocols for newly discovered worlds. If his experience with Jurak had taught him anything, it was that the galaxy was full of intelligences that didn't conform to Federation standards or expectations. Sometimes, in his dreams, he still felt the vibration of Jurak's communication, still saw those sensory pits adjusting to take him in, the creature's form shifting from aggressive to curious. Still experienced that moment of connection across an impossible divide. He would never know exactly what Jurak was guarding on Tharkael. Some ancient technology, perhaps, or knowledge too dangerous to fall into unprepared hands. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe Jurak was just protecting its home, as any sentient being might. What mattered was that Elias had learned to listen instead of fight, to observe instead of attack. And in doing so, he had survived where warriors had fallen. The galaxy called him the man who tamed the beast, a title he rejected whenever he heard it. He hadn't tamed anything. He had simply understood, for a brief moment, that even the fiercest creatures in the universe might respond to respect with something other than violence. It wasn't a lesson the Federation was eager to embrace, built as it was on expansion and control, but it was a lesson Elias would spend the rest of his life teaching to anyone who would listen. Because somewhere on a twilight world circling twin suns, a guardian continued its eternal vigil. And thanks to one human's courage and compassion, it might one day see visitors from the stars as something other than enemies to be destroyed. That alone was victory enough for Elias Gray, the survivor who learned to listen to the galaxy's fiercest beast. Years passed. The legend of Elias Gray and his encounter with Jurak grew, distorted by retelling until it barely resembled the truth. Some versions cast him as a warrior who defeated the beast in single combat. Others claimed he had tamed it like a pet. A few even suggested he had become part of it somehow, merging with the creature to gain its powers. Elias ignored the stories. He continued his work, developing protocols for peaceful contact with non-humanoid intelligences. He trained teams in observation and adaptation rather than confrontation. And occasionally, when a particular problem arose that required his unique perspective, he ventured into the field again, though never back to Tharkale. Until the message came. It arrived on a standard Federation channel, but encoded in a pattern that made the communications specialists scratch their heads when they finally decoded it. The content was even more puzzling. A series of coordinates on Tharkale, accompanied by a simple phrase, "The Guardian calls." There was no sender identification, no explanation, just those coordinates and those words. Elias knew immediately, somehow, impossibly. Jurak was reaching out. The Federation Council was divided. Some saw it as a trap, a lure to draw more victims to the planet. Others recognized the unprecedented nature of the contact and advocated for investigation. In the end, the decision was Elias's. He was the only one who had encountered Jurak and lived. If anyone could interpret this message, it was him. He chose to go alone. Despite the Council's objections, a team would only complicate matters, might be perceived as a threat. This had to be one-on-one, human and Guardian. The shuttle deposited him at a safe distance from the coordinates, well outside Jurak's known territory. As before, Elias carried no weapons, only survival gear and a more sophisticated version of the signal generator he had improvised years ago. The familiar twilight of Tharkale greeted him as he stepped onto the surface. The dual suns cast their mixed light across the landscape, creating the same disorienting shadows he remembered. But something was different. The vibration, that omnipresent hum that had been the backdrop to his previous visit, was absent. Elias activated his scanner, calibrated to detect Jurak's distinctive electromagnetic signature. Nothing. Either the creature was masking its presence, or it wasn't here. He began the journey to the coordinates, moving carefully through the twisted forest. The planet seemed unchanged, timeless, as if the years since his last visit had meant nothing to it. After a day's travel, he reached the location specified in the message. It was one of the nodes he had identified before, a clearing surrounded by the strange, twisted trees. At its center was a structure he hadn't noticed during his previous visit, a low, dome-shaped building made of the same shifting, metallic organic material as Jurak itself. Elias approached cautiously, sensors alert for any sign of the Guardian. The structure had no visible entrance, just a seamless surface that pulsed slightly, as if breathing. As he drew nearer, a section of the dome began to change, flowing like liquid to create an opening just large enough for him to enter. An invitation? Elias hesitated only briefly before stepping through. The material flowed closed behind him, sealing him inside. The interior was lit by a soft, ambient glow that seemed to come from the walls themselves. The space was circular, with what appeared to be control panels or interfaces embedded in the walls. In the center stood a column of the same flowing material, constantly shifting and reforming. And within that column, partially visible through the translucent substance, was something Elias had not expected, a humanoid form. It wasn't human, not exactly. The proportions were wrong, the limbs too long, the head too large, but it was clearly a sentient being, preserved somehow within the column. Before Elias could process this discovery, the familiar vibration returned, not painful this time, but gentle, almost musical. The walls around him began to display patterns of light, similar to those he had observed when Jurak used its sensory appendages. Instinctively, Elias activated his signal generator, setting it to respond to the patterns. The device hummed to life, establishing a connection far more stable than his improvised version had achieved. The patterns changed, became more complex, and then, to Elias's astonishment, They began to form symbols he recognized. Federation Standard Script. Elias Gray, the one who listens. He stared at the words, hardly believing what he was seeing. Jurak? He whispered. Not Zurak. Jurak is vessel. Guardian. I am memory. The column in the center pulsed, drawing his attention back to the preserved form within. You're one of them, the ancient civilization. Yes, last. Preserved in memory matrix. Zurak protects. Elias's mind raced with the implications. The Guardian is protecting you, your consciousness? Not just me. Knowledge, history, warnings. Warnings about what? The patterns shifted again, forming images rather than words. Elias saw stars exploding, planets cracking apart, entire systems consumed by something that looked like liquid darkness. The void between, it hungers. It consumed my world, my people. We fought. We failed. I remained to warn. Elias felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature inside the dome. What is it? This void? Not entity. Not life. Absence. Anti-pattern. Spreads through misuse of energy matrices similar to Zurek's form. The implications hit Elias like a physical blow. The Federation's scientists had been studying the electromagnetic properties of Tharkael, planning to harness them for new power generation technologies, if what this entity was saying was true. The Federation needs to know this, he said urgently. They're developing technologies that might... I know why I called you. The one who listens will make others listen. Why not communicate directly? Why wait all these years? Zurak damaged in conflicts with armed intruders. Communication matrix compromised. Repairs slow. Your previous visit helped accelerate restoration. Elias thought back to that moment when he had stood before Zurak, offering the data crystal. Speaking words the creature couldn't understand, but somehow responding to anyway. Had that brief connection helped repair whatever damage previous encounters had caused? What do you need me to do? He asked. Take knowledge. Share warning. Prevent repetition of our fall. The column in the center of the room pulsed again, and a small object emerged from it, a crystal similar to the one Elias had offered to Zurak, but composed of the same shifting material as the Guardian itself. Complete record. Our science. Our errors. Your scientists will understand danger. Elias accepted the crystal, feeling its strange weight in his hand. It seemed to pulse in time with his heartbeat, warm to the touch. I'll make sure they understand. I promise. You have shown wisdom where others showed only force. Zurak will no longer attack those who come in peace. But Guardian remains. Duty continues. The patterns of light began to fade, the vibration diminishing. The opening in the dome reappeared, a clear indication that the audience was over. As Elias stepped back outside into the twilight of Tharkael, he felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had come seeking understanding and found a mission, a purpose greater than survival. He activated his comm unit, surprised when it connected immediately to the orbital station. The electromagnetic interference that had blocked communications before was gone, or rather, controlled now, directed away from him. This is Gray, he said, requesting immediate extraction and direct transport to Federation headquarters. Priority Alpha. Acknowledged, came the response. Extraction team en route. Did you find what you were looking for? Elias looked back at the dome, now sealed once more, indistinguishable from the surrounding landscape. In the distance, he thought he saw a familiar shifting form moving through the trees, Zurak, resuming its patrol, its endless vigil. Yes, he said quietly, and much more besides. The Federation Council received Elias's report with a mixture of awe, skepticism, and fear. The crystal he had brought back contained information far beyond current scientific understanding, glimpses of technologies that could revolutionize space travel, energy production, even the nature of consciousness itself. But it also contained warnings, detailed accounts of how the ancient civilization had inadvertently created pathways for the void between to enter their reality, consuming everything it touched. The similarities to current Federation research were too close to ignore. Some counselors advocated destroying the crystal, burning the knowledge before it could lead to potential disaster. Others saw only the opportunities, the advantages such technologies could provide in the ongoing competition with rival galactic powers. In the end, a compromise was reached. The knowledge would be studied, but slowly, carefully, with multiple safeguards and under the direct supervision of a new division headed by Elias himself. Tharkael was declared not just a restricted zone, but a sacred site, protected by interstellar law. And Jurak, once feared as the galaxy's fiercest beast, came to be seen in a new light, not as a monster, but as a guardian, a protector of knowledge both wondrous and terrible. Elias never returned to Tharkael. He didn't need to. His connection with the Guardian and the ancient consciousness it protected had changed him, given him purpose beyond mere survival. He dedicated the rest of his life to ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not be repeated, that the hunger of the void would remain unsatisfied. Sometimes, late at night in his quarters at Federation headquarters, he would feel a familiar vibration, a gentle hum that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly to his bones. In those moments, he knew that across the vast distances of space, the Guardian remembered him, the one who had listened, the one who had understood. And in a galaxy where understanding was all too rare, that was legacy enough.